It was a beautiful day on the island of Sodor. Thomas and Percy are busy shunting cars at Brenham Docks, but they were being a little silly. But Thomas and Percy weren't being very careful. Long ago, before there were any railways, the island of Sodor were ruled by kings. And the greatest king of Sodor was King Godred. Godred was a well-loved king. He protected the island from invaders with the help of his gallant knights of armor. Life was good under Godred's reign. It was a golden age, and King Godred wore a golden crown. But one day, the crown was stolen. The thieves were eventually caught, but the crown had been hidden. It was never seen again. The ruins of King Godred's castle can still be found at the estate on the Earl of Sodor estate. These days, instead of knights in shining armor, it's railway engines that charge about the island, all across to the mainland, by the rolling bridge in Vicarstown that can be raised up like a castle drawbridge to let ships pass. One day, Thomas had been sent to the washdown with Annie and Clarabelle, but Thomas and his coaches weren't the only ones there. Thomas and his friends were very excited. They have never met the Earl before. All the engines and all the guests were waiting for Spencer to arrive with the Earl. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt sent Thomas to Brenham Docks to collect the shipment for the Earl. Thomas climbed slowly up the steep slope to the Earl's estate. Thomas was left wondering about the Earl's plan and the King's golden crown. One evening at the Vicarstown rolling bridge, a certain silver streamlined engine came back to the island. The next morning, Percy brought Gordon his coaches. Gordon hurried after Spencer, but it was hard to build up speed with 4 heavy coaches behind him. He was just catching up when Spencer pulled off the main line to the Earl's estate. Later that morning, Percy was shunting cars at Brenham Docks when he noticed an engine hiding behind some crates. In the afternoon, Thomas met Spencer at the Blue Mountain Quarry. As Thomas watched Spencer go, he couldn't help wondering what the Earl wanted big blocks of stone. The other engines were curious too. Just then, Toby arrived with a very important message. Percy arrived at Brenham Docks. Poor Henry was stuck in the siding with his broken safety valve. Percy was very excited. He had never pulled a long, heavy goods train before. So Percy, Thomas, and James were all coupled to the cars, and off they went to the Earl's estate. As the engines approached the Earl's estate, they saw new rails and wooden sleepers, stones, and building materials. Then Thomas saw his old friend, Jack, the front loader. The heavy goods train was split up. James and Percy took the building materials, while Thomas shunted the crates and containers onto the new siding. At the steamworks, Victor was surprised to see Thomas, James, and Percy. That night, in Tintmich's, Thomas, Percy, and James told the other engines about Stephen. The next morning, Henry was still having trouble with his safety valve. Emily was very happy to take Henry to the steamworks. She wants to see the old-fashioned engine. But when she arrived, she couldn't see any engines at all. Emily wasn't the only engine who wants to see Stephen. Over the coming weeks, everyone in the steamworks worked hard to restore the old engine. Thomas and his friends came by whenever they could. They wanted to see how the work was progressing. Soon, Stephen looked shiny and new. His funnel was straightened, his boiler had been fixed, and he'd been given his old tender, a whistle, and a fresh coat of paint. Thomas and his friends were very excited. But Stephen looked a little sad. And then an idea flew into Thomas's funnel. James and Percy wondered if Thomas was doing the right thing. But Stephen just laughed. Percy, Thomas, and James climbed up the steep track to the estate. The castle looked very different now that it was being restored. Percy, Thomas, and James wondered what kind of special job that the Earl had in mind for them. At the steamworks, Henry's valve had finally been fixed. He was ready to go back to his job. Stephen was eager to find out about his job too. But Stephen wasn't feeling patient. He was feeling excited. So, like a brave knight of old, Stephen set off on a quest to find his new job. Percy, Thomas, and James had already found their new job, helping the men to build a roof over part of the castle. They were coupled to some flatbeds, which held a tall platform that was being used to raise the roof beams. The engines will have to move it to the right place for each beam. They never have a job like this before. They would all have to work together. Gordon was pulling the express when Spencer came up alongside him. Spencer tried to pull ahead, but Gordon kept pace with him as they raced along. Then there was trouble. There was something on the track ahead of Gordon. It was Stephen. There was nothing Gordon could do. He had to go slowly. Back at the castle, Thomas and his friends were working together again. Then there was trouble. Luckily, no one was hurt. Paxton and Diesel were very surprised to see Stephen turn up at Brendam Docks. Poor Stephen felt disappointed. But if his new job wasn't in Brendam Docks, he'd just have to continue on his quest to find it. After the accident was cleared away, Thomas and his friends worked hard to complete the roof. At last, the final beam was put into place. The job was done. Stephen was heading up to the Blue Mountain Quarry. But the Blue Mountain Quarry was much bigger and noisier than any quarry Stephen had ever seen before. Stephen was coupled to a long line of cars, loaded with slate, but they were too heavy. The men uncoupled one of the cars, and Stephen tried again, and again, and again, until Stephen managed to pull one car forward. But it was too late. As Stephen came to a bend, the heavy car pushed him forward and nearly ran him off the rails. Stephen's quest to find a new job wasn't over yet. Back at the Earl's estate, Thomas, Percy, and James were amazed to see what's inside the Earl's crates. There were drones, catapults, flags, and tapestries, old statues, shields, and suits of armor from all over the world. Hero was very happy to be coming back to Sodor from the mainland. When James was very happy to be having a washdown. When Gordon and Spencer were very happy to be racing each other again. When the two speedy engines were waiting at the red signal. They were both streamlined like Spencer. Stephen was on the slope below the castle when he noticed a track to the old mine. Stephen made his way along the overgrown track. But when he finally reached the entrance to the mine, he found it was boarded up. Thomas and Percy were ready to push the troublesome trucks loaded with dirt away. The Earl thought they were too heavy for two small engines alone. But Thomas didn't want to wait for James to come back. He wanted to tell Stephen all about his new job. But it was too late. The troublesome trucks were already on the slopes. They started to pull forward, dragging Thomas and Percy behind them. The troublesome trucks were too heavy to stop. There was only one way to go. Thomas and Percy pulled the heavy cars back again, feeling very relieved. They didn't realize that poor Stephen was now trapped in the mine. The island of Sodor was buzzing with excitement about the grand opening of Oak State Castle. Visitors were hurrying across from the mainland to be there. All the engines were working hard to make sure everything was ready. Thomas went to the steamworks to find Stephen. Thomas was worried about Stephen, and when he told James and Percy, they were worried too. So Thomas, James, and Percy set off to find Stephen. They asked everyone they met if they seen him. Nobody knew where Stephen was, and it was starting to get dark. Stephen raced around the old mine, but he couldn't find another way out. Then, as he hurried around the bend, he bashed into some rocks. It started a rock slide. Back at Tim's sheds, Thomas told the other engines that Stephen was missing. As the dust cleared, Stephen saw an old wooden chest amongst the fallen rocks. The next morning, Thomas woke all the engines up early. He had only one thing on his mind. They've searched every shunting yard, station, and tunnel. There was no sign of Stephen anywhere. Poor Stephen was running out of steam. Wheel turn by wheel turn, he tried to keep going, but Thomas pushed his way along the overgrown track. The last section of track is weak, where the wooden supports have rotted away. Then Thomas came to the end of the line, where the entrance to the mine was blocked by the stones. He was about to leave again when he noticed something down below the track. Stephen tried to whistle, but nothing came out. His boiler was almost dry. Stephen tried to whistle again. He summoned all his energy and, as quick as his pistons would pump, Thomas hurried to Oak's castle to fetch help. Then he raced back to the old mine with Jack, but Stephen didn't answer. As soon as the entrance was cleared, Thomas rushed forward. The wheat track shifted under his weight, but Thomas moved bravely over it and into the mine. By this time, the news of Stephen's rescue had spread. The next day, was the opening of Ostay Castle. Guests came from all over the island and the mainland as well.